turning point of World War II. It was also one of the bloodiest and most brutal battles in human history, the Battle of Stalingrad. In just 6 months, the German and Soviet sides committed a total of nearly 5 million troops. Combined casualties on both sides exceeded 2 million. This single battle cost the Soviet Union an entire generation. One day in November 1942, the Battle of Stalingrad had already dragged on for 4 months. Under relentless artillery fire, Stalingrad had been reduced to a dark, lifeless city. Large numbers of Soviet soldiers were crossing the Volga River, trying to wrest control of the city back from German forces that had already pushed inside. However, every move was clearly observed by the German troops within the city. To block the Soviets on the Volga, the Germans decided to destroy their own fuel depot. Towering flames instantly lit up the entire Volga River. Soviet soldiers who had just landed were mercilessly engulfed by the fire. Yet none of this could stop the advance of these battle-hardened soldiers. Even with their bodies set ablaze, they continued to surge forward, charging through the sea of fire without hesitation. In flames, the Soviet troops pushed ahead like riders from hell, driving straight toward the first German defensive line in Stalingrad. With fire covering their bodies, Soviet soldiers relied on unbreakable will and unwavering belief, rushing into German trenches in their final moments and taking the enemy down with them. Faced with such a ferocious assault, German troops panicked and scattered in retreat. The German defensive line began to collapse. In an effort to stop the Soviet counterattack, the Germans dispatched dozens of Stuka dive bombers to strafe and bomb the Soviet forces crossing the river. Under the relentless assault of German aircraft, Soviet main forces suffered devastating losses. The river crossing plan was shattered as a result. An entire division was reduced to a single Soviet squad that managed to break through. They successfully slipped into the city of Stalingrad, carefully avoiding German patrols along the way. Unexpectedly, the moment they entered an abandoned building, they discovered a pair of German soldiers stationed inside. A fierce close-quarters battle erupted instantly. Working in coordinated formation, the Soviet squad quickly eliminated all the German troops inside the building. Afterward, a Soviet lieutenant contacted divisional headquarters by radio, but the order from divisional headquarters was for them to hold the abandoned building at all costs until the main force arrived. It turned out that this building occupied the high ground overlooking the Volga River crossing, providing perfect cover for the Soviet Army's second attempt to cross. They immediately began constructing defensive fortifications. Surviving Soviet soldiers from other areas soon received the same order and gradually converged on the building. As a result, the defensive force continued to grow. Although they came from different units, they all shared the same belief as they gathered on the banks of the Volga to fight for their homeland. However, the Soviet squad now faced a severe ammunition shortage, with enough firepower to last only 2 hours in a firefight. To replenish supplies, they began stripping ammunition from the bodies of fallen German soldiers inside the building. The corpses were then tossed directly out of the windows like trash. This scene happened to be witnessed by a German colonel watching from a building across the street. Seeing his men's bodies treated with such humiliation filled the colonel with rage. To lure the Soviets out of the building and wipe them out in one strike, he immediately came up with a vicious plan. He ordered nearby surviving civilians to be driven into streets visible to the Soviets. Then he selected a mother and daughter from the crowd and forcibly locked them inside an abandoned railcar. All exits were sealed with wooden planks. The desperate mother kept trying to calm her daughter, but in the next moment, a German flamethrower trooper unleashed a ruthless burst of fire. The mother and daughter were instantly engulfed by the flames. Seeing this cruel scene, the Soviet soldiers in the building were overwhelmed with fury. The Soviet lieutenant snatched the Mosin-Nagant from the sniper and fired 2 shots to end the mother and daughter's suffering. Then he fired a 3rd shot, detonating the German flamethrower. At this point, the Soviets could no longer suppress the rage boiling inside them. With thunderous shouts, All Soviet soldiers charged out of the building in blind fury and engaged the Germans in a fight to the death. Although the German schemes succeeded in drawing the Soviets out, they had no idea how terrifying enraged Soviet soldiers could be. The Soviets turned their anger into raw strength and fought with astonishing bravery. Faced with the Soviets' fearless assault, the Germans quickly lost their footing and were forced to retreat under mortar cover. The German plan not only failed to eliminate the Soviets in the building, but also cost them 14 casualties. The Soviets, by comparison, lost only 6 men. However, this battle further depleted the Soviets' already limited ammunition. To resupply, the Soviet lieutenant ordered 2 soldiers to search the wreckage of a downed aircraft in the center of the square. But when they reached the square, they discovered 3 German soldiers also scavenging ammunition from the wreckage. One Soviet soldier immediately drew his dagger, quietly circled behind the Germans, and launched a surprise attack. With swift and precise strikes, he eliminated all 3 German soldiers and recovered the ammunition they had gathered. This brave Soviet soldier had once been a famous tenor singer before the war. On the very first day the war between Germany and the Soviet Union broke out, he volunteered to enlist, but after enduring the brutality of war, he had become hardened, withdrawn, and emotionally cold. Stories of the Soviets holding the building, killing the enemy with courage, and defeating superior numbers quickly spread. This helped the repeatedly battered Soviet main forces regain morale and prepare for another river crossing. However, the Germans were already prepared, having deployed a large number of 320mm heavy rocket launchers at a concealed position on the opposite bank. After receiving intelligence, the German forces continuously launched heavy rocket artillery, unleashing relentless bombardment on the Soviet troops crossing the river. As waves of rockets screamed through the sky one after another, the Soviet squad inside the building could do nothing but watch helplessly. Under such intense bombardment, the Soviet main force suffered devastating losses. The river crossing plan failed once again. At this moment, an artilleryman in the Soviet squad suggested destroying the German rocket battery to stop the overwhelming barrage, but his teammates nearby responded with mocking expressions. The German rocket launchers were positioned around a corner, completely outside their line of sight, and they had only 1 shell left. Hitting the target with a single shot would require the shell to turn midair, yet the artilleryman remained calm, because he had already carefully calculated the firing angle. The Soviet squad moved to the concealed field gun. As the artilleryman adjusted the angle and pressed the firing trigger, the shell roared out of the barrel. Erupted across the German rocket position, the Soviet squad burst into cheers. They had no idea this success completely enraged the German colonel. He immediately ordered a captain to retake the building occupied by the Soviets before nightfall. Seeing large numbers of German troops assembling, the Soviet lieutenant quickly ordered everyone to prepare for combat. They smeared themselves with blood to disguise as corpses, then used German bodies as cover to set an ambush. When the German advance unit rushed into the building, the Soviets seized the moment, sprang up, and launched a surprise attack, catching the Germans completely off guard. Hearing the commotion, German troops outside prepared to enter the building as reinforcements. Seeing this, a Soviet soldier rushed to the pre-positioned general-purpose machine gun and unleashed a furious barrage. The Germans were thrown into chaos and had no choice but to retreat in disarray. The captain's failed assault on the building only made the colonel more furious. He berated the captain, demanding the building be taken or face severe consequences. As a result, the German captain prepared to launch another attack on the Soviet-held building. 3 German soldiers quietly approached the structure, preparing to carry out demolition. Unexpectedly, they ran straight into a Soviet sentry. The sentry immediately threw a grenade. However, the German captain had secretly circled around behind the Soviet sentry. The sentry was shot in both legs, unable to move, and was captured. He was then brought before the German colonel and forced to reveal the number of Soviet soldiers and their firepower layout inside the building. The Soviet sentry pretended to possess critical intelligence and deliberately lured the colonel closer. The moment the colonel bent down, the sentry swiftly pulled a dagger hidden in his boot and stabbed the colonel repeatedly in the side. Although the quick-reacting German captain killed the sentry with a burst of gunfire, he failed to save the colonel. The colonel died on the spot. As a result, the German captain became the highest-ranking German commander in Stalingrad. With a single order, he assembled all armored units and launched a full-scale assault on the Soviet-held building. Dozens of Tiger tanks rolled forward in massive formation, crushing every obstacle in their path. The Soviets stared grimly out the windows, realizing this would be their final battle. Under the cover of tanks, well-equipped German infantry steadily advanced toward the Soviet position. The Tiger tanks lined up side by side, their barrels aimed at the building at close range. The German captain immediately covered his ears and gave the order to fire. Facing such overwhelming shelling, the Soviet soldiers inside the building had nowhere to hide and suffered heavy casualties in an instant.
Живой? Живой. Ты-то как? Ничего. Иди, я Никифора подожду. Иди.
After the bombardment ended, the German captain ordered the assault to begin, demanding that no corner of the building be left unchecked. Although only a handful of Soviet soldiers remained, the survivors were determined to fight to the very end, even with their last breath. At this moment, the Soviet lieutenant tried to contact divisional headquarters, but before he could tune the radio, the German captain was already behind him. The two men faced off at point-blank range and opened fire at the same time. They kept shooting until every bullet was spent, neither willing to fall before the other. At that moment, a surviving Soviet soldier rushed over after hearing the gunfire, but the lieutenant ordered him not to shoot. The soldier moved forward to help stop the captain's bleeding, but the lieutenant told him to immediately use the radio to contact headquarters and request artillery coverage on the building. By now, large numbers of German troops were still closing in, and the Soviets were no longer capable of resisting. As the high ground overlooking the Volga River crossing, this building could never be allowed to fall into German hands. Mutual destruction became the only remaining choice.
Калуга, дайте огонь! Сейчас дайте! Координаты! Квадрат 24, долгота 17 градусов, широта 14. Как поняли? Прием!
Калуга, вас не понял. Это координаты дома, где наша часть. Как поняли, Калуга?
Это мы вызываем! Дайте огонь! Немцы лезут! Дом, дайте огонь сейчас!
Понял вас, Калуга. Все понял. Прощайте, ребят.
Even in their final moments, these Soviet soldiers showed no fear. After a brief silence, Soviet artillery rained down like a storm. The German tanks and infantry surrounding the building were wiped out in an instant. The entire structure was reduced to rubble under the bombardment. The Soviet soldiers inside the building also gave their lives amid the artillery fire. And this was only a tiny fragment of the Battle of Stalingrad. In real history, this Soviet squad fought from this building for a full 58 days, despite lacking ammunition, food, and reinforcements. During the Battle of Stalingrad, the average survival time of a soldier was less than 9 minutes. The level of devastation speaks for itself. In the face of fascist aggression from Germany, the Soviet people did not surrender. With unbreakable will and unwavering fighting spirit, they resisted the invasion. Facing the guns of the enemy, the Soviet people did not fear sacrifice. Facing overwhelming bombardment, they did not fear being buried beneath the ruins. With iron-like resolve, they drove out the invaders and ultimately won the Great Patriotic War. I am a film enthusiast. Thank you for subscribing to my channel, and I will see you in the next episode.